In this video, I'm going to take a look at the Petri CC Auto 55 f1.4. It's a lens I'd rank at number 5 in my list of the top 5 Petri fast 50s. I'll be posting separate videos on each of the other Petris, and if you're interested in learning more about Petri, a Japanese company that sold a range of SLR cameras between 1959 and the 1970s, then I posted an introductory video on that. And as I explained in the introductory video, I used these 4 main criteria for ranking the Petri lenses. Before I tested this lens and compared it with other Petri fast 50s, I probably would have placed it at number 1 in my ranking, as physically and optically, given its speed, it's an impressive beast. By reputation, it has one of the largest rear elements of any vintage f1.4, and it's supposed to be the closest you can get to the rendering of the legendary Carl Zeiss Jena Pancolar. But though I've used the lens, I have mixed feelings about giving the lens a top ranking. On the one hand, it has some special superpowers. On the other hand, those superpowers are actually rather limited in scope, as I'll be explaining in this video. Measuring the Petri's rear element, it really is quite a marvel compared to other classic 55 f1.4 lenses, including the famous Tomioka-made lenses. The diameter of the rear element is 36 mm. That's 20% wider than this Tomioka's rear element at 30 mm. As a result, according to some people online, this might just be a uniquely fast lens, faster than its f1.4 competitors, in terms of letting in more light. I thought I'd test this lens to see if this is true. Tomioka-made lenses are not a good choice, as they have radioactive elements, unlike the Petri. Where the radioactive glass is yellowed, it reduces light gathering by a stop or two. So I used a Cosine 55 f1.4 instead, another lens that doesn't have radioactive glass, and it has the smaller rear element. I also included the next fastest Petri lens I own, a Petri 50 f1.7 in the test, and here are the results. I shot this scene indoors at ISO 100 and an exposure speed of 1/20th of a second for all 3 lenses wide open. My initial reaction to seeing these images side by side is that the Cosine image is perhaps a little lighter than the Petri, while clearly the f1.7 lens is darker. But the more I look at these images, the more I think that the Petri's image may have a slightly greyish colour tint, so the coloration is impacting the whites. Coloration differences are common occurrences in how old lenses render. Because of this, perhaps a better way to assess the lens's speed is to look at depth of field. Zooming right in, I think the Petri probably does have a slightly narrower depth of field, i.e. the blurred objects behind the focus plane are more blurred from the Petri, but still the differences are small. I tried another test with these batteries, and I've included a Tomioka-made 55 f1.4 in this one. If you crop into the outer focus batteries on the right, I think that, again, the Petri image may have an ever so slightly narrow depth of field, but it's not a big difference. Out of curiosity, I tried a third test with another lens that is famous for having a large rear element, a Nikon SC Auto 50 f1.4, with a rear element that is just 1 mm narrower than the Petri. The Nikon's image looks lighter to me, maybe again because of the Petri's colour tint. In terms of depth of field, the Petri's 5 mm extra length at the lens's MFD definitely gives the Petri images a narrower depth of field if you look closely at the out of focus items. You can see the focal length differences in these battery images, taken at each lens's MFD. And the impact on the depth of field, the Petri's is clearly narrower. In conclusion, I'm not completely convinced about the validity of the theory that the Petri is the fastest 55 f1.4 old lens. If the Petri does have a slight edge over other 55 1.4s, it's hardly noticeable. But I do think the larger rear element has a more significant impact in other ways, and I'll demonstrate this later. Back to the lens's reputation and design, I think it would undoubtedly be higher on many lists of excellent old lenses if it wasn't so rare and it didn't have the Petri breech-lock mount. It's hard and expensive, but not impossible to find adapters for this mount. The adapter I use for my Sony digital cameras is this one. It's potentially a useful design, as not only is it supposed to allow Petri mount lenses to focus to infinity on digital cameras, it also has a helicoid mechanism that allows you to focus closer up. I've had mixed results getting the Petri mount adapted lenses focusing to infinity, especially with this 55 f1.4. The lens apparently has 7 elements in 5 groups, the same as the radioactive Carl Zeiss Jena Pancolar. The Petri has 6 aperture blades with a clickless aperture ring, and the minimum focus distance is 0.6 meters. It's a solidly built lens, but I wish it had a shorter MFD and more blades. In terms of rendering like the Pancolar, I'm not so sure. It certainly doesn't have that gorgeous golden warm tint that the radioactive Pancolars produce. The Petri's colours are much colder. Leaving aside the colour rendering, I don't own a Pancolar f1.4, so it's difficult for me to compare. But looking at sample photos online, there are some obvious similarities and some obvious differences in how these two lenses render. They have a similar dreamy and beautiful look to wide-open images. Objects can have a glow in certain light, but that's common to most of these old fast 50 types. Both the Pancolar and the Petri produce large, attractive bokeh bubbles. Images from both lenses can have a swirl to the background highlights wide open in the right conditions, if you like that kind of effect. In this image of a smartphone gimbal from the Petri, the swirls are particularly pronounced. To be fair, the Petri swirls don't always look this obvious, and they're not as strong as the Helios swirls, for example. The big difference I can see between the two lenses involves the shape of those bubbles. Away from the centre, the Pancolar produces what one owner has described as bowl-shaped bubbles. The Petri, on the other hand, produces more uniform, cat's eye type shaped bubbles. And this difference does have a strong impact on the overall look of images, where there are a lot of out-of-focus highlights. Aside from the Pancolar comparisons, what is the Petri's performance like? Wide open and closer up, the Petri is reasonably sharp, but it's not any sharper than my Cosina or Tomioka-made lenses. And all these 55 f1.4s deliver splendid subject isolation from stop down to wide open. With the Petri, I really like the bright airy bokeh it produces, especially wide open and close up where there are light backgrounds, and this is where the lens's superpowers lie. I do find the lens can struggle a bit with very bright contrasts, and that's probably not helped by that large rear element. This is where you may be better off with a slightly smaller rear element, or a better coating to the glass, particularly at the rear. Or would you be better off? Because when I look at these and other images, I personally think the way the lens renders the mix of overexposed areas with other areas of soft out-of-focus blur is rather appealing. Normally, when fast 50s overexpose or even blow out white areas, those areas stand out rather incongruously. But with this lens, they seem to be part of the magic of the overall image, and that's what I mean by a special superpower. One other point about the rear element, and that is it is very exposed. On my copy, the edge of the glass has been hit and chipped a little over many years of use. You can see the chipped glass if I zoom into this photo. And the chipping shows up on the edges of some bokeh bubbles, which is not a good thing. Wide open in the right light, the lens flares in a similar way to the Tomiokas, and I personally like this effect. I haven't seen a lot of purple fringing with this lens. It performs impressively in this regard. Stop down, the lens is sharp, and stopping down helps to reduce that wide open glow. The downside is that the 6 blades hexagon shapes are more apparent in points of bright light, and as I've already mentioned, I'd rather have more blades for these shots. Not that the other options, such as the Tomioka-made lenses, have any more blades. I wouldn't say that the stop-down colours have the same vibrant zing as some of the other Petri lenses. On the other hand, I know some people prefer more restrained colours, and the colours do have a more classical vintage look. And I wouldn't say the lens is any more impressive stop-down than other fast 50s. Fortunately, my Petri Plus adapter will focus far enough away for head and shoulders portraits, and that's good news, as this lens is, of course, primarily a portrait lens, and not, say, a landscape lens. The lens produces nice results for converting colour images into black and white images, such as here, where I've taken advantage of both the interesting bokeh effects and the tendency to overexpose bright, contrasty areas wide open. Or you can stop the lens down a little for a more constrained look, or with the right background and light, you can go for a smooth, dreamy, wide-open shot. The Petri 55 f1.4 is a very interesting lens, and despite its rarity, it's not as expensive to buy as some other classic f1.4s. But then again, it is a challenge to adapt to modern digital cameras. It does have a specific special superpower relating to the way it renders wide-open, close-up images in bright light with the right composition, but that's a rather narrow scope for a fast 50. And in some respects it rather flatters to deceive. I haven't found it significantly faster than other f1.4s, and it doesn't render in exactly the same way as a Pancolar. In the next video covering my 4th rank Petri, I'll be featuring some direct image comparisons between the f1.4 and a slower Petri lens, and I'll be discussing why I decided to rank the slower lens above the f1.4 as a more generally useful lens. So that's it. A lens I thought I might be ranking number 1, but after trying it out, I ended up ranking it last. I'll include a link to my other Petri Fast 50 videos in the description below, as soon as I post them. They'll not be nearly as long as this one, because there was quite a lot to cover with this particular lens. All comments are gratefully received, and until the next time, all the best.